This video is part of the continuing series on Excel and VBA best practices that focuses on manipulating and accessing external data. This video is specifically about setting up your spreadsheet to accommodate accessing external data. And we'll also be talking about setting up the spreadsheet to address security concerns. This video is brought to you by PolarisInvesting.com, a site for creating defensible valuations. As a reminder, business valuation is based on expectations derived from skillful consideration of past facts and future possibilities. As a reminder, this series of videos looks at Excel from two distinct sides. The one side shown in this graphic here is essentially the user looking at Excel, treating Excel just as rows of cells and formulas that go in the cells, literal values, that kind of thing. But then there's also this backside of Excel, which is more the VBA programming. And in this video, we're focusing on the front side here, namely, like I mentioned earlier, the setting up of your workbook. First suggestion here in setting up a workbook to manipulate and access external data is a general recommendation. It has to do with creating a worksheet named Manage. For example, spreadsheet that we've been using called QueryIt. Here's an example of kinds of things you would find on a Manage tab. It'd just be information that all worksheets and VBA code and that can be used by all those entities. Also, anything that you would want to configure, allow the user to change the behavior of the spreadsheet, and that's reflected primarily in these two gray boxes. User can select off or on for something that we'll be talking about later on in the series of videos. And this cell here allows you, as an example of setting a configuration value of how the spreadsheet functions, in particular what that refers to is over here. We're talking about the ending record that we pull out of some column separated values. And we can come over here to the Manage tab and just change that to, let's say, record 2 is the last record that we want to pull. But it shows you an example of the kind of things you can set up over here and have a single worksheet that users go to do any kind of configuring of behavior of the spreadsheet. And next we're going to talk about this general Excel configuration. And first off, if you notice in this QueryIt spreadsheet, we do have up here at the top a menu tab for developer. That's not shown by default, so you want to have that typically shown so that you, the developer, and even your end users, if you allow them to go into this developer tab, can easily find that tab. So you go to the options and you do custom ribbon, and then you just want to make sure this developer tab is being shown. Once the developer tab is shown, then you didn't want to go up here to Visual Basic, and then in this pop-up screen that appears, you want to go into Tools, References, and make sure the following selections have been made primarily so you can access data. So the main ones, Visual Basic for applications, VBA, that's already selected, but then you want to select Microsoft Excel 16.0 Object Library, the OLE Automation, Microsoft Office 6.0 Object Library, the Forms 2.0 Object Library, and then the ActiveX Data Objects 6.1 library. Next, you want to make sure your trust settings for Excel are set up appropriately to allow accessing of external data. So I want you to focus on this paragraph here that's part of some general information about setting trust in an application. But it says here to review and select Excel security settings, select File, Options, Trust Center settings, and from there it goes on, and I'll just let you read the rest of this before I actually demonstrate how to go about doing it in Excel. And then you want to realize is that because your spreadsheets will be accessing external content, you want to make sure you go to the data connections and allow those connections to be set up. So to show you what I'm talking about here is if you go to File, Options, Trust Center settings, and then you look at the external content. You'll want to either enable all data connections, which probably you don't want to do. You probably want to make it so at least that first time a data connection is attempted, it'll prompt the user to ask them if they're okay with making that data connection. Then prompt user on workbook links, and prompt user about linked data. So make sure you have all the prompt settings selected. Next, you want to go to the protected view, and really to ensure that harmful VBA code and things are not loaded from the internet. All these things should be by default selected, enabling protected view. In fact, you can see that in the spreadsheet that we're looking at right now. The QueryIt, which is downloaded from an internet share. You can see that we're actually in a security warning, and that's what we want to have. And you get that by selecting these 3 check boxes here. Your macro settings, you want to enable all macros. Now it says here not recommended. Again, that's why we did here the protected view, to make sure you're downloading, you can get approval from the user before any macros are actually executed. And because these protection settings are enabled, some normal functionality, particularly 2 subroutines that deal with VBA code that you, the VBA programmer, can have executed when the workbook opens, are disabled when you enable this protected view. Now, when you close the worksheet, you can still run the close subroutine, but you just can't run the open subroutine, which we'll see here later in this video. And then the last setting you want to do around ActiveX is you want to make sure you have prompt me before enabling all controls. And notice this QueryIt spreadsheet has been downloaded from the internet, and therefore it's asking the user, because of the selections made with the Excel setup of environment, it's asking if I trust the content and whether I'm willing to enable the content. Well, before we enable it, I want to show you that what I was talking about earlier with these 2 specific subroutines that are used by all spreadsheets. One is called when the workbook opens, go execute some code, or when right before it closes, go execute some code. These are actually 2 events, an open event and a close event. Well, it doesn't matter what you put in here, it's not going to get executed if the spreadsheet is coming off the internet and the Excel environment is set up in a protected mode. Now, like I said earlier, the before close event will cause this code to actually be executed. So I'm going to go ahead and enable the content. Like I said, nothing happened in terms of that open event. And so if you're used to coding your VBA to have it do things when a spreadsheet first opens, we're going to have to you have to see how to handle that in a little different way, which we'll cover here briefly in a few moments in this video. Okay, let's next talk about protection at individual cell levels. If we go up here and highlight all cells and just simply do format cells, there's a tab here called protection. You can see here all the cells are by default, once you set up protection at a cell level, they'll be considered locked for an end user, which means only the formulas or the literal values that currently are there will be able to formulas will be able to update the cell. If there's just a literal value, it'll always be that literal value, and it's locked. The user won't be able to change the value. Only the function, if there's a function in the cell, can it end up changing the value that's in that cell. This other selection is not automatically selected, but you could, for individual cells, select hidden, and that just means the formula. If there's a formula in that cell, it would be hidden. If a user were to click on that cell, they just see no formula, even though there's actually a formula there. So typically, if you're going to do that, you want to make sure it's locked as well. It would be very unusual to hide but not lock. That means the user could change it and not even realize that there was a formula there. So, but a good practice is just to uncheck this lock and then be specific with which cells you really want to have locked. So let's say that I do that and I for some reason I want to lock this cell right here. Then I would go to that individual cell and then I would say I want to lock it. And then I come up here to review and then I protect the sheet. That enables the protection that you set up on individual cells. So I'm going to go ahead and do a protect. You can see here that it's only going to let me select the cells, and it'll let me select even unlocked. It's locked and unlocked cells, but that's all I can do. So if I try to change the value, it won't let me do it. So I'm just going to type in a password. So it asked me twice to make sure I enter the right password. Now if I go up to a cell, I can enter, but whatever I want. But if I go to this cell here, I get an error. I can't, as a user, I can't change that cell because it's been locked. So I can go back and just simply unprotect the sheet, but I'm now having to enter the password that was entered. And then you can see here that if I come up here, I can now enter in whatever I want into that cell. Now the cell itself is still, the protection is set to locked. It's just not going to be enabled until you come up here and indicate you want to enable all the cell protection across the worksheet. Another option up here when you do the review, you could do a protect workbook, which prevents users from viewing hidden worksheets, adding, moving, deleting, or hiding worksheets, renaming worksheets. Pretty much just protects the structure of your overall Excel workbook with a password. Another protection option is to go over here to the info section and select protect workgroup and select encrypt with a password. And then what you do here is you enter a password, and now every time the workbook is opened up, a password will be required, and then once the user's in, all the other kinds of protections associated with the workbook are active as well. Let's now return back to the Manage tab, and I'm going to go through some values that typically you would want to have associated with the Manage tab, namely things like what is the most recent available version of the spreadsheet, so you can compare. A good idea is to always have written or use a cell somewhere that indicates the current spreadsheet version, and this is just a date. That's typically what's used to indicate a specific version of a spreadsheet. So that you like to have the ability to go out when the spreadsheet is open, to go out to the internet somewhere and pull back what the current or the most recent available spreadsheet is, and then be able to compare the two, then possibly even throw up in VBA code, be able to throw up a message box if a newer version is available than what the current version is that the user is using. You also want to check and make sure you have internet connection. You want to maybe record the public IP address of the system that's running your current spreadsheet, the computer name, the username, and even what version specifically is the user using to run your spreadsheet. Well, and then also you want to record the date and the time that the spreadsheet was open. Also want to make note of the current name of the spreadsheet. This is needed if you ever want to hyperlink to a specific cell, which does require a fully qualified address. Well, a lot of these kind of things that you can populate with the open event, but because you've got to assume that the spreadsheet is coming off the internet and user has their Excel environment set up in a protected mode, you cannot get these values normally. So you typically, once the spreadsheet has been content has been enabled, you need to have some kind of event that or something the user does that causes this VBA code to be run to go fill in these values. So in this spreadsheet, you just simply have the event being this user clicks on this cell A5. So when I click on it, it comes back, and now VBA code is running to say that, hey, look, we're going to do some things here. And then when I say OK to that, you see, yeah, it went out and it checked the internet and came back that, yeah, the computer is on the internet. It's able to access some external websites. It went and pulled a SQL Server database and it came back with what is the most current version available. Even recorded the public IP address of the box that the user of the system that the user is currently on, with the computer name and also the username. The version of Excel is version 16. I also wrote again the current date. Actually, if I do it in time, so if I run this again, you notice time's going to change yet again to a little bit later, the same day or date, but a different time. Now, the reason you want to record the date and the time of when the spreadsheet is first opened is so if time is needed by other cells or other functionality in the spreadsheet, it has a place to go to get at least the time when the spreadsheet is open. And for most applications, that time is close enough to the current time to be useful in the application. Now, if more current time is needed, a user could just simply use you could just simply use the now function. The problem with the now function in Excel is that it's volatile, and that means that every time there's a recalculation, that cell will get recalculated. That function now will get recalculated in that cell. And if other cells reference this cell, namely C4, they'll get recalculated. So it's very easy to see how this something as trivial as determining the current time can have huge performance impacts on a spreadsheet. So it's the best to just record the time when the spreadsheet is open and use that for most places where you need the time. Now, instead of using if current time is needed somewhere in the spreadsheet, it's best to use a Polaris provided VBA function called UpdateTime. And then it will show the time, and then if we format it as let's say as a date time kind of thing, you'll see what the current date is. Now, the reason you want to call a VBA function is this function is not dynamic. So whenever you somewhere in the code you need the current time, call UpdateTime, and it'll only be executed when you actually invoke the function, and not like the now function, which is invoked and recalculated every time there's a calculation being done in the spreadsheet. Now, the reason you want to use VBA code to get things like the computer name, username, Excel version, things like that, is to get that in Excel, you have to use the what's called the info function, and the info function is volatile. So that means every time there's a calculation, that information is recalculated. So it's best to let a VBA function do that. So let's talk. Well, let's go see. I know this is on the Excel, but we're going to be covering Excel and VBA throughout the series, and sometimes we just have to merge the two. And here's one of those examples where, to understand what's going on here on this worksheet, we need to look back behind and see what's going on in the VBA. So here in A5, I'm going to go out and look at the VBA code that gets executed. Here are the manages. So here we are, selection change. And we can say if the cell that changed is cell A5, do the following thing. So there's popping up a message to the screen, and then it goes ahead and populates A2 and A1, A2, and A3 with the values. Spreadsheet version calls a function called Excel version. Public IP address, there's a Polaris provided function that will go out and get the public IP address, computer name, username. You can see on through the code. And eventually what you end up doing normally is you would call to log all this information in a back-end SQL Server database. but don't have that functionality built into the spreadsheet, so just commenting that out. But I did want to go through and show you all the steps leading up to that you would typically do. But again, you'd have to have, because you can't run with a spreadsheet coming from the internet, you can't execute the Workbook Open event. You now need to have some trigger event once your spreadsheet is open. And in this spreadsheet, we're just triggering here. It goes off, runs that VBA code, populates these values, and if we had a spreadsheet open functionality, we'd log it in a back-end SQL. We'd log this kind of information in the back-end SQL Server database. Now we are assuming that there's a back-end database that has the current version of the spreadsheet, and that's where we're pulling that from. All right, well, this has been just on basic things you do around setting up your workbook environment, and then some Polaris, right here at the end, some Polaris provided functions to allow you to have more information about who's using your spreadsheet. Then if you wanted to, you could even have a function that would log that in the back-end SQL Server database. All right, thanks for watching.